Another print disability, which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Evelyn, and for the next hour I'll be reading from the April 5th issue of the New York Times Magazine on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Forget the AI apocalypse. Memes have already nuked our culture. From our jokes and slang to the White House's policy messaging, internet brain rot has escaped our phones to take over, well, everything. A friend told me a story recently about her son. He's about 9 years old and doesn't have much access to social media. One day this past fall, he came home from school and told his mom that kids there were saying 6-7. He wanted to know what it meant, so she pulled out her phone and looked up an explainer video that tells, for those who have been similarly perplexed, a familiar story. A rapper named Skrilla said it on a song called Doot Doot. Audio from the song started being used in TikToks about LaMelo Ball, who is 6'7". Some goofy kid yelled it at a high school basketball game, which became another TikTok, and it went from there, aided no doubt by the fact that 6 and 7 are statistically quite likely to appear in that particular order. But what does it mean, my friend's son asked. Well, she told him, it doesn't really mean anything. This did not go over well. He was so upset that he couldn't get to sleep that night. The realization that this thing everyone was saying, could be meaningless genuinely rattled him. His heart and mind, still innocent of the internet, were simply unprepared for the possibility that it could do this to people. My heart and mind are, respectfully, different, having been ravaged by decades of exposure to this stuff, but I had roughly the same experience learning about 6-7, and like my friend's son, I had a hard time shaking the discomfort. To me, what was unsettling about it is that it wasn't all that unusual. It was just an extreme instance of something that happens all the time. People in general, and children in particular, are constantly repeating phrases and concepts they learned from their phones. Typically, they're under the impression that what they're saying means something, because no matter how inane, these phrases refer back to things that could be said to exist outside the phone. Chopped unks, rizzlers, guyets, things of this nature. That's all real stuff, or real enough anyway. The 6-7 meme was revelatory because of the immense gap between the symbolic payload, essentially non-existent, and its cultural penetration. It worked like tracer dye running through our information ecosystem, revealing its functions and dysfunctions. And the strange thing about this meme, or slang, or whatever you want to call it, is that our shared world of people, places, things, and events didn't factor into it. It simply flowed out from social media platforms into that world with an extraordinary degree of success, and for no real reason at all, a secret message to us from the world within the phone. Or perhaps a demonstration of force. This is how things are going to go from now on. Maybe a decade ago, it still felt as if there were a wild expanse within your phone, a portal to a vast and sometimes terrifying alternate dimension. If the sensation resembled anything in the real world, it was vertigo. There was a bottomless pit in the palm of your hand, and since the mass isolation of the pandemic, that feeling has been replaced by a growing sense of claustrophobia. You can leave it in the other room if you want, but your phone still closes in on you. Even if you spend very little time online, there's little you can do outside the logic of the internet. It is a force that warps our reality, a cosmic background noise that is everywhere and nowhere, something inhuman that's subtly reshaping our language, our politics, even our minds. Here's something that's almost too obvious to say. Most of what people do on social media is copy other people. This is particularly apparent if you flip over to a highly algorithmic feed For You on X, Instagram Reels, the entirety of TikTok, catchy phrases, joke formats, funny audio clips. These repeat over and over and over again. This is obvious to the point of being tautological. The algorithm surfaces what people seem to like. Memes are memes only because people like them, and that's all true, but it also obscures something about their production and maintenance. This work is done by hordes of people who are jostling to be heard. To them, the meme is not just an idea, or more likely a joke, but also a tool, one that offers legibility and reach, a way to cut through the noise. They are not simply creating it, they are in a symbiotic relationship with it, or possibly a parasitic one. In a 2021 survey, Pew Research Center showed that lurkers on Twitter outnumbered the posting class by enormous margins. Even among users who did post, just 25% of accounts generated nearly all the activity on the platform. The same seemed to hold true on TikTok, according to another Pew report from 2024. One-third of American adults said they used the app, but among them, only 40% had ever posted a video publicly. The top quartile of adult users produced 98% of the publicly available content on the platform, a ratio nearly identical to what Pew discovered on Twitter. Pew may have found an iron law of social media use, a new mathematical constant, one that's essential to understanding the dynamics of these platforms. The culture of any given network is generated by a small minority of people with some trait, or more likely deficiency, that makes them desire this novel form of social competition more than others. And one way to ensure you'll at least be in the conversation is to stay legible, to talk about what others are talking about, or at least to speak how they're speaking. So these people subordinate themselves to the logic of the platform and reshape their thoughts to suit it, in the process pushing these memes, slang, whatever, up the food chain. In this sense, the success of any given word or phrase is less interesting than the success of internet slang as a whole. The incentive structure of the platforms can now produce new units of culture practically without the need for human will, or more precisely by warping our will to suit its needs. The slang term itself is but a grain of sand around which copycat posting behavior collects until it becomes large enough to pass through to the offline world. It's just like how slang used to work, only completely different, shaped not by the needs or wants of a particular scene, place, or subculture, but by the incentives and logic of scaled digital networks. If you haven't become addicted to a social media platform, you may not be aware of what exactly goes on inside the head of someone hunched over a phone. It's not clear that addicts are aware of it either. Jonah Weiner, a contributing writer for this magazine, wrote about this phenomenon on Substack in a way I found alarmingly accurate. He described the experience of thinking in tweets rather than normal thoughts, even when he was far from his phone, in this case washing the dishes and finding he was low on soap. His first thought was to water it down to make the bottle last longer, but then everything that followed was deranged by the internet. Instead of having normal thoughts, Weiner wrote, thanks to Twitter, I think something exponentially more inane and annoying, such as the masculine urge to water down the dish soap, or the two genders, picture of brand new dish soap versus picture of old diluted dish soap. It goes on from there. Men will dilute the last millimeter of dish soap rather than go to therapy. No, but the way I just diluted the dish soap. Every one of these joke structures is immediately recognizable to anyone who has spent a lot of time on X. What Weiner is describing is the imitative behavior that sustains and nurtures memes. But more important, he's describing what this behavior requires, which is the hijacking of your frontal lobe by the incentives of the platform. Disappear into your phone for long enough and your phone will disappear into you. putting you to work for the platforms even in your downtime. People have taken to calling this brain rot, which isn't a bad term for it at all, not just because phone slang is stupid and annoying, though it is, but because it really does rework your gray matter. In 2024, brain rot was selected as the word of the year by Oxford University Press, beating out other meme words like lore, demure, and slop. Last year, it was rage bait, another term for another kind of online distraction, which beat out aura farming, another meme. In 2023, it was Riz, which beat out beige flag, something from TikTok. Since 2021's Vax, Oxford has consistently given the WOTY to some sort of internet meme. Maybe it's because the public votes on it, but maybe it's because this is what our culture produces now. It almost seems like a direct challenge to the idea that language evolves to describe ever more of our world. What if it can instead degrade or become caught in the gears of a more powerful meaning-making engine? Around the time that 6-7 was corrupting our youth, something happened that I hadn't seen happen in a long time. A magazine article went viral. This used to happen a lot before Elon Musk acquired Twitter and made it more difficult to share links, further trapping its users in its increasingly right-wing hothouse. But this article seemed to speak to a culture-wide anxiety, one shared even or especially by the platform's power users. It was about something called gooning. You should probably read the article for yourself if you haven't, as it will prevent me from having to describe in great detail what gooning is. In short, it is a subculture of pornography addicts who masturbate for hours on end, often while live streaming footage of themselves to other pornography addicts. Practitioners refer to the spaces where they do this as goon caves, a particularly evocative term, not just because of the damp darkness it conjures, but also because it calls to mind the famous cave from the other terminus of Western civilization, the allegorical one. As in Plato's cave, in the goon cave reality is replaced by representation, which in turn supplants reality for its prisoners. And just as in the allegory, even the knowledge of the outside world does not diminish the preference for the cave. One of the gooners confesses to the article's author, Daniel Kolitz, that his fear of the complexity of human sexual encounters is why he turned pornography into the direct object of his sexuality. It's a bit like becoming addicted to a smoking cessation aid, but then again, that's something a lot of people do now too. In fact, Kolitz's point is that whether we're gooners or not, I'd like to believe that most of us aren't, we're all doing something like this all the time, wasting hours watching internet videos, becoming obsessed with micro-celebrities, and replacing real relationships with these synthetic substitutes. Does any of this sound familiar? Colas asks, do you maybe know some folks who get up to stuff like this? It's not hard to find other online subcultures with some of these hallmarks that misdirect our impulses into a downward spiral. Twitch, which turns an interest in playing video games into the experience of watching someone else play video games, the podcast fan subreddit that inevitably turns on the hosts of the podcast. And then there are others that are almost entirely consonant with gooning in their total inversion of means and ends. Think of a phenomenon like looks-maxing, in which men inspired by an incel message board memeplex alter their bodies, sometimes violently in pursuit of a hyper-specific set of ratios thought to be most attractive. The foremost practitioner, a live streamer known as Clavicular, has said he may have sterilized himself by taking testosterone, which would be a slightly comical outcome for someone so singularly interested in how he is perceived by the opposite sex. But of course, the real object of his desire is something else, something alien and hidden within the works of the platforms, and in his virality he has at least become worthy of its love. But you too may be gooning reality just by using your phone. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the April 5th issue of the New York Times Magazine on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Consider that TikTok is arguably the main vector for all youth culture, and anyone curious enough to keep up with it will get whatever it doles out. And even if you think you aren't keeping up with it, you may be anyway. My peers in the media like to joke that TikTok is the assigning editor of most trend pieces, so even if you are reading the newspaper, your view of contemporary culture will be shaped by it, by the few entrepreneurial types who tend to its perpetual stew of memes. It is at once a paper-thin phantasmagoria and basically the only thing we get. Whether we like it or not, we are all in the cave now. Perhaps that's all that's left. One of the big fears about artificial intelligence is that as it digests the entire corpus of human culture, it will eventually surpass us, revealing the hidden logic that guides our creative output, or at least prove more economical in comparison, good enough if hard to control. Infinite monkeys on typewriters, grinding away at no marginal cost. The concern is that we'll lose some essential human quality to the culture we consume, that it would be stolen from us, either by robots more clever than we are, or executives who never cared about culture anyway. But hasn't something like that already happened? Many memes we consider authorless really have a human origin point that has been lost under layers of accretion and mutation. But what's further fascinating about 6-7 is it had no author. Skrilla, for his part, claims to have recorded Doot Doot in 10 minutes, immediately after crashing his car, and seems to have been pulling in sonic references almost at random. The song interpolates music for children, Baby Shark, and rap songs that came out when Skrilla was a child, White Tea a Baby, in free associative fashion, which also seems to be how Skrilla wound up saying 6-7. It's something different Philadelphia rapper often ad-libs on his songs, in reference to his street, 67th, which is all the way across town from Skrilla's neighborhood. Skrilla doesn't like to give straight answers about why he said it, but would it matter if he did? The people making edits to the song on TikTok were referencing LaMelo Ball. The kid at the basketball game was referencing the TikToks. Whoever wrote it in fresh snow on my Subaru Forester back in December was referencing all of this, I guess. No matter where you look for a human author, you can't find one. Had there been one, though, I'd love to shake his hand, because there's nothing stupid or inane about 6-7. On the contrary, there's something ingenious about making a meaningless inside joke out of two consecutive integers, at least if your goal is to see how far it can spread among 12-year-olds. It's too weird for a human intelligence to have come up with. Instead, it was conjured into being by something else, some entity we've created by disappearing into our phones for several hours a day. Maybe we could live peacefully with such an entity were its influence confined to the realm of jokes, slang, and pop culture. But it seems capable of influencing just about everything, even the government of the most powerful country in the world. It's no secret that the Trump administration adores its memes. Staffers have repeatedly made headlines with their gleefully nasty deployment of them. What's more striking is how fluent they appear to be and how widespread the habit is. Here's the Energy Department posting Simpsons memes native to X. Here's the Labor Department making sly references to QAnon. Here's the gutted education department posting a Franklin the Turtle meme about its own uselessness. But no agency has been willing to demonstrate its online bona fides quite like the Department of Homeland Security, which repeatedly makes posts drenched in imagery borrowed from the online right. GigaChad, a meme from 4chan, Agartha, an absurd joke about an Aryan paradise beneath Earth's crust, trapping people in crystals, something from a video game. All of it can be found on the social account of the law enforcement agency created to prevent the next September 11th. This sensibility also flows into a $100 million recruitment effort for immigration and customs enforcement, targeting people in right-wing spaces. According to the Washington Post, the digital recruitment ads are aimed at UFC and NASCAR fans, conservative podcast listeners, people interested in guns and tactical gear. On one hand, using data like this is a perfectly sensible way of recruiting or running any sort of ad campaign in 2026. On the other, it seems guaranteed to bring in ideologically selected recruits, plucked from niche online communities and summoned by winking right-wing imagery. Surely a law enforcement agency recruiting in this fashion might also find itself operating in ways consistent with the memes. America after 100 million deportations, as one infamous DHS post went, and counter to most Americans' sense of fair play. But these are the risks of replacing democratic feedback mechanisms with the pleasures of the cave. With so much of our world being so rapidly reshaped for such stupid reasons, it's hard not to feel as if we're living in one of the canonical AI doom scenarios without even noticing it. I'm thinking about the paperclip maximizer, a thought experiment laid out in the early 2000s by the philosopher Nick Bostrom. In Bostrom's scenario, an advanced AI tasked with making paperclips is unleashed into the real world without proper guardrails, prompting it to use up all available resources to meet its lone objective, possibly even deciding to turn us into paperclips. It's a parable in which slightly miscalibrated incentives lead to unimaginable destruction and catastrophe, as everything is reworked to fit the needs of the machine. And this is, not to sound too dire, more or less what happened to everything since the advent of social media. It took only about a decade, but now every day our phones churn out these paperclips, low cannonly, coastal grandma, 6-7 paperclips. That thing about the Roman Empire from a few years back, paperclip, small, disposable, extruded and shaped to fit the needs of the platform that spits them out. You can unfold them, try to twist them into new shapes, but they never quite lose their old form. Of course, you can pop them right back where they came from, and they ought to work. Hell, if you're lucky, sometimes two more come out. This is the informational ecosystem we've made, without really intending to, one that has reshaped all of culture by privileging the outlook of those who bend their will to the masses. One powerful enough to make a whole generation of kids shout random numbers for a few months. One whose totality is impossible to take in because little can be said to exist outside of it. Everything and everyone is plugged into it, so completely that we can't know if it was a good idea or not. But it's fun, everyone's having fun, and in the end, that's what's really important, right? Ozempic for baldness is changing the way men see themselves. A pill that lets men keep their hair is rewriting the rules of masculinity, by Susan Dominus. For most of his 20s, Elliot Connors did not think a lot about his hair. He was losing some of it maybe, but so what? This was what happened to men. He was funny and sharp. He had a girlfriend. He began to worry only after he and some friends from graduate school in New York started a group chat last summer. In it, they talked about their classes and sports and joked about their love lives and The thread frequently digressed into a series of semi-serious conversations about hair loss, whether their hairlines were staying the same or, God forbid, receding, which products to apply, which medications to take, how much they did or didn't care. Several of Connor's friends were taking a drug called finasteride, which is remarkably effective. The research shows that it significantly slows hair loss in most men for at least 10 years, with many men reporting effectiveness well beyond that. Studies have found that it stimulates at least some renewed hair growth in a majority of men. Connor's friends kept close track of their progress from week to week. Dermatologists commonly recognize 7 stages of hair loss, which were refined and popularized in the 1970s by Ottar Norwood, a dermatologist and pioneer of hair transplant surgery. Many of Connor's friends, young men in their 20s, were a Norwood 2 or even a Norwood 3, displaying the beginnings of a creeping V on both sides of the forehead. When you reach a Norwood 6, you may be cooked in the online discourse of hair loss, too far gone for help. Before too long, Connors began inspecting his hands after washing his hair. Was more of it falling out than usual? He examined old photos of himself and compared them with his reflection in the mirror, looking for signs of change. He grew increasingly observant of other men's hair. He noticed whose hairline was receding and who was so young that he took his lush mane for granted, blissfully ignorant of the hair loss that was most likely in his future. He started to think he had no choice if he wanted to keep up. He'd better start taking finasteride. He had read that finasteride could cause worrisome side effects, low libido, for example, or depression, and he would come to feel conflicted about the popularity of the drug. We could all just not be on any of this stuff, and then our relative appearances would be the same, he said. But now we all have to be on it just to keep up with everyone else who's on it. It's like a nuclear arms race. Losing your hair for men was once largely inevitable and nearly universal. 2/3 of American men will experience hair thinning by their mid-30s, and 85% will experience significant hair loss by 50, according to the American Hair Loss Association. People used to say, losing your hair is just part of life, accept it, said Mark Avram, a dermatologist in New York who specializes in treating hair loss. In earlier eras, Hollywood's leading men, Paul Newman, Jack Nicholson, Bruce Willis, played romantic leads long after their hairlines started to recede. Fathers and uncles counseled the young men in their lives to come to terms with the changes as part of the journey into adulthood. There was literally no other option, Avram said, other than plugs. Today, that's no longer true. Celebrities and others who can afford it shell out up to $20,000 to get hair transplants, which have become harder to detect and ever more precise. Surgeons can now extract individual healthy follicles from abundant areas of their patients' heads and implant them one by one into the scalp's hair deserts. This more expensive, newer approach promises a more natural hairline, although those who know what to look for can still tell when someone has had the procedure. If an actor has a full head of hair sticking straight up from his forehead and he's over 30, he's probably had one, said Leah Ansell, a dermatologist in Rye, New York, who says she likes to point them out to her husband during awards shows. They've all had one, all of them. Men with more modest means can find packages that fly them to Turkey and deliver the same procedure for around $3,000, or they can start with the cheapest option of all, which is going on, finasteride. Prescriptions for the drug in the U.S. tripled between 2017 and 2024, a time when telehealth companies were taking off just as men started spending hours a day staring at their hairlines on Zoom. Feeding that anxiety is a mass marketing campaign, teaching men the same brutal self-scrutiny that women have long been trained to perform. A typical male in his 20s or 30s is likely to receive a flood of ads and shout-outs on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and the live streaming platform Twitch for hair growth products that appeal to men their age, not just the usual tablets, but chewable pills and sleek black bottles of mainspray. Young men have also been encouraged to care deeply about their appearance by their country's own commander-in-chief, whose highest praise for various appointees includes comments about their good looks. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the April 5th issue of the New York Times Magazine on the Niagara Frontier radio reading service. He's central casting, President Trump said of his new pick for the chair of the Federal Reserve, Kevin Warsh, a man in his 50s, it must be noted, who has a full head of hair. Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, is more like a Norwood, too. Trump seems to have a particular obsession with hair, talking at one campaign rally about all the best products he douses his head with in the shower, and famously asking a young woman at another event to come up and inspect his hair to verify that it was all his own and not, as one radio personality was suggesting, a toupee. Young men who have come of age in the time of the manosphere are prime audiences for endless reels from influencers, some of them exceptionally buff, some of them funny, some of them with millions of followers, who are trying various treatments in the hope of regaining a full head of hair. The hair loss influencer is a category unto itself. Zeph Sanders has over 1 million TikTok followers tracking his hair journey. Typical content. POV, you spent the last year falling in love with yourself, reads the text introducing a quick montage of all the steps he has taken over the past 12 months to improve his hair, starting with a hair transplant. The ubiquity of this kind of content makes losing one's hair no longer seem inevitable. Going bald can now feel like a choice, a conscious decision. Frequently, the advertising and those influencers are conveying the message to young men that they should start taking finasteride young, in their early 20s, so that they don't lose their hair in the first place. Andrew Dudum, a co-founder of Hims & Hers, one of the main telehealth companies selling hair loss medication, said in a 2017 interview that their goal was to market those treatments to a younger audience, adding that while he was in his college, he and his friends could have benefited from products that protected their hairlines. The approach fits into the broader prejuvenation trend, in which young men and women are using lasers, fillers, and products like Botox to fend off signs of aging before they start, rather than doing damage control when degradation is already well underway. Ansel, the dermatologist, said she has had parents come in asking about finasteride for their teenage sons, looking to make sure they get all the best they can have in order to succeed in life. Young men are also coming in on their own for help keeping their hair. More of them are really anxious about it, Ansel said. There's no new epidemic of hair loss, but there is an epidemic of men freaking out about it. Before there was finasteride, there was rosemary oil, there was sunlight exposure therapy, there were hair plugs, there were comb-overs, there were toupees. Before there was hair loss medication prescribed by online pharmacies in elegantly designed minimalist earth-toned packaging, there was the exclusive-sounding Hair Club for Men, a business created by Cy Sperling, a former pool salesman who collaborated with a hairstylist to offer weaves that blended a man's own remaining hair with color-matched hair on a nylon mesh. I'm not only the hair club president, Sperling says in a commercial from 1984 displaying a full head of chestnut brown hair, but I'm also a client. In the 1970s, doctors studying minoxidil for its effects on blood pressure noticed in early trials that it caused men's hair to grow. It was later brought to market for hair loss under the name Rogaine. The drug, which seems to make it easier for blood oxygen and nutrients to reach hair follicle cells, has been wildly popular ever since, but only in about half of men will minoxidil trigger the kind of enzyme activity required for the drug to be effective. A majority of men who use it do find that it thickens their hair and slows the hair loss process, but it seems to delay hair loss, not prevent it altogether. Finasteride, by contrast, tends to yield better results for men hoping to hold on to their hair and to promote new growth. Researchers first noticed its effects on hair in the early 90s when the drug was being administered in a trial to treat men with enlarged prostates. The drug inhibits the conversion of testosterone into a hormone known as DHT, which is crucial in the development of male characteristics. In adult men, DHT is also associated with hair growth on their bodies and hair loss on their heads. Why hair follicles respond to DHT so differently depending on where they are on the body is one of the hormone's mysteries. Doctors don't even understand why men tend to lose the hair above their temples first, but they do know that finasteride is especially effective in bringing back hair on the top and toward the back of the head. Once an area of the scalp is shiny smooth, that means that the hair follicles in that area may be too shriveled to be revitalized. First brought to market for hair loss by Merck as Propecia in 1997, the pill became available in generic form in 2013. By the time the pandemic hit and telemedicine took off, it was already cheap. Now men could access it privately. In some states, simply by uploading a few photos and answering a few questions online. Also available at big box store pharmacies for as little as $5 a month, less than the cost of a single day's latte fix, the drug is nonetheless a lifelong commitment, at least for men who continue to care about their hairlines. When men go off the drug, their hair loss resumes in about 6 months. Finasteride, many dermatologists think, is one of the great cosmetic cures of the 20th century, and yet there is a catch. As many as 1 in 20 men who take the drug orally will experience a side effect, erectile dysfunction, low libido, or occasionally low sperm count or depression. A vast majority of the time, those symptoms resolve in a few weeks after men go off finasteride, and sometimes even when they stay on it, according to studies of the drug. But in rare instances, men have reported debilitating symptoms that continue even after they stop taking the drug. In addition to erectile dysfunction, low libido, and depression, some men have also reported symptoms such as genital numbness, cognitive difficulties, a shrinking of the penis, and even suicidal ideation. Having one or more of these ongoing symptoms is known among some researchers and patients as post-finasteride syndrome, which is poorly understood and a topic of considerable debate in the field. Well-conducted research from a randomized controlled study published in 2021 found that using finasteride topically, applying a spray or a gel on the head, reduces the likelihood of serious side effects and is almost as effective as the oral version. And new drugs, including one that stimulates hair follicles' mitochondria, are expected to come on the market in the next few years and reportedly have no side effects. But for now, most dermatologists still prescribe oral finasteride, which has been studied the longest. Topical versions, which are still not approved by the FDA, typically cost more and have to come from a compounding pharmacy. Many men also grow frustrated with regularly applying serums or gels because the products mat their hair during the day or leave their pillow greasy at night. Doctors worry about finasteride coming into close contact with women who are pregnant or may become pregnant, given that DHT plays a significant role in developing a developing male fetus. And although finasteride itself won't cause hair growth on, say, a girlfriend's cheek, it's often compounded with minoxidil, which might. I, for one, would never take the medication said Jonathan Clavel, a urologist in Houston, because if I were one of the unlucky few who turns out to get the syndrome, I know I'd regret it. While the dermatologists I spoke with said they've never seen a patient who suffered from ongoing symptoms, Clavel is one of 5 urologists I interviewed who said they had. He even suspects that the number of people reporting these serious problems could be artificially low because so many men secretly suffer in shame with erectile dysfunction and never seek a diagnosis or help, and men suffering from depression or brain fog might not make the connection. Clavel has seen some patients who have no idea until he asks them for a list of the drugs they've taken. That finasteride might be associated with these symptoms. Clavel has tremendous sympathy for his patients. Earlier in his 40s, he himself was a quickly balding man who was tempted to do anything he could to keep his hair. For years he relied on minoxidil, which eventually stopped working. I believe there's a very big misconception that only women care about their appearance, he said. And it's not true. Men just don't talk about it with our friends. But secretly, behind closed doors, we are trying to keep our younger selves for as long as we can. Maybe it is some kind of machismo, he mused, that makes men so likely to compare their own hair with others. When you watch TV and movies and all these actors, Clavel said, they have beautiful long hair. You're like, man, how are they able to keep all that volume? Clavel's wife, Mildred Lopez Pinheiro, a dermatologist with a thriving practice in Houston, regularly prescribes finasteride once she's alerted patients to the possible side effects. If they're informed and willing to take the risk, why not, she said. But she has assured her husband that she does not feel as if he needs it and supports whatever choices he makes about his hair. Clavel recently gave up on salvaging it and shaved his head, as have many balding men, some of whom are active on dedicated forums or proudly serving as social media cheerleaders for the look. He has been at peace with his choice, even when his 5-year-old daughter commented on the change. Daddy, she said to him, you don't have hair anymore. The social media universe expends so much energy on the topic of male hair loss that meta conversations online can assume viewers' familiarity with the obsession. What would you rather lose, a finger or your hair? The comedian Hannah Berner asked a series of men on her Instagram feed last December. Finger, answered her fellow comic Eric Scott. Fingers. When the comedian Adam Friedland filmed an episode of his show with the influencer Clavicular, a steroid-loving, status-chasing champion of a classically handsome aesthetic, he asked a question that made it clear how ubiquitous concerns are about finasteride's side effects. Would you rather lose your hair or your penis? Friedland and Clavicular agreed. They'd want to keep their hair. The dilemma over the drugs trade-offs is a perennial topic of debate on one of the more popular men's health subreddits on Reddit, r/Trestless, a space where men have been discussing hair loss and treatment since 2011. The subreddit saw a huge spike in traffic during the pandemic and now has about 413,000 weekly visitors, roughly 4 times the number of weekly visitors to R. Wegovy weight loss, for example, a popular subreddit devoted to that GLP-1. Men share pictures of triumphant hair regrowth, seek reinsurance, pour out their hearts, vent their frustrations about the women who reject them, and get into vicious debates about whether or not the drug actually poses a real risk. Doctors tell me to avoid finasteride is the name of one thread. Finasteride changed my life for the better, starts another. The discourse veers from admissions of profound insecurity to signs of real mental health struggles. I hate hair loss to my core, one poster wrote 3 months ago. I'm literally gonna cry, bro. He couldn't even lead a normal life, he wrote, with his hair thinning starting so young. Another man said going bald was so awful for him, that he was wondering whether anyone else was reconsidering having children, given that hair loss is genetic. After I posted a request on Reddit for men to share their thoughts about finasteride and hair loss, Kieran, his middle name, a project manager in London, reached out to me in the spirit of making a public service announcement. He worried that needless fears of rare side effects were keeping men from leading happier lives. He was so concerned about his hair loss, which started in his 20s, that his anxiety seemed akin to what experts call hair loss dysmorphic disorder. When he socialized, he always wore a cap. He was embarrassed when he met up with his old friends from high school because of the jokes they made about his skull. He became convinced that his social status had plummeted. He had a girlfriend, but he felt insecure in his relationship. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the April 5th issue of the New York Times Magazine on the Niagara Frontier radio reading service. He started on finasteride and was seeing results, but the reports on Reddit unnerved him, and he went off the drug for several years until he felt his hair loss was intolerable enough that it was worth taking whatever small risk was involved. My relationship got better because I felt so much more confident, he told me. I volunteer for things I never would have done. I'm competing in a CrossFit competition. I'm doing more public speaking at work. He was convinced that men with more hair who look younger are treated differently. People make quick judgment calls, he said. They might see someone whose hair is thinning and think they're a stressed out person who doesn't look after themselves. Another man who responded to me was a 27-year-old lawyer in New Jersey who had also become somewhat obsessed with his balding crown. He felt shame about his hair and maybe even more shame about how much he cared. On a distress scale of 1 to 10, I was at about an 8, he said. He found r/trestless and was unsure which worried him more. The stories of many men who claimed that hair loss tanked their dating opportunities or the ones who said the drug tanked their sex lives. Finally, more persuaded by all the positive comments he was reading, he decided to go on the drug and quickly observed a troubling change in his sex life. He was producing more watery semen, a rare but known side effect of the drug's tendency to shrink the prostate. His erections were also not as hard. From everything the lawyer read, his symptoms would resolve as soon as he stopped taking finasteride, which he knew some posters saw as an argument to persist, at least until he had a girlfriend. But it felt weird to be taking a medication that would do that to me and somehow say, "That's okay," he said. I just felt like I couldn't be sure that this wouldn't somehow have long-lasting effects. He went off the drug, the symptoms did quickly resolve, and he looks back at that period of misery as wasted energy. Now happily married, he responded to me to urge men to stay off the message boards. They're an echo chamber of anxiety, he said. One young man told me he first ordered finasteride from a telehealth platform when he was 23. He was new to a relationship and got nervous when he started experiencing sexual side effects. He went to another online provider and ordered a pill that treats erectile dysfunction rather than lose more of his hair. Rachel Rubin, a urologist who specializes in sexual medicine in the Washington, D.C. area, told me that some patients who come to her for sexual problems refuse to go off finasteride even after she explained that the drug could well be causing or exacerbating the issue. It worries her that they prioritize their hair even as their sex lives might suffer, making their search for intimacy that much harder. Finasteride might be the ultimate drug for a generation of young men who have never been more focused on optimizing their looks and yet have never been less connected romantically or socially. Social media not only feeds men self-improvement content on their phones, but also encourages them to curate images of themselves for others to scrutinize. Plenty of men in their 50s might be hard-pressed to find more than a few dozen photos of themselves from their 20s, but a typical 20-something guy might post that many in just a few months, putting himself out there to be appraised and judged. Psychologists have known for years that women who are especially preoccupied with their physical appearance tend to have more difficulty with anxiety and sexual satisfaction. Women have had this kind of thing to deal with for so many years, said Ryan, one of the friends in Elliot Connor's group chat. While it's awful that this is now happening to men, there is also a kind of poetic justice to it. Connors and a few friends from the chef chat group had agreed to join me at a restaurant in Soho in March to talk about their hairlines. Ryan, who asked to use only his first name so he could speak frankly about something so personal, described how he became fixated on his hair loss right after graduating from the University of California, Santa Barbara. The town was full of young students who made him all the more self-conscious. At home during the pandemic, he had far too much time on his hands to watch social media and then stare at his receding hairline in the mirror. He had been taking finasteride since 2023 and was relieved by the volume he'd recaptured. Ryan didn't have any side effects from the medication, which Alex, as a young man sitting next to him, was also taking. Only when I posed a question directly to the gathering did he mention that he, in fact, had experienced a dip in his sex drive when he went on the medication. This was news to the group. You didn't text the group that, Connor said. You have to tell us. Alex, who also asked that only his first name be used, defended himself. This was before the group chat started. At the time, he was unprepared for this possibility. The doctor who offered him the prescription did not mention anything about low libido. He went off as soon as he noticed, but then all the hair that had filled in started noticeably thinning. He decided he would try the drug once more. If it happens again, then I'll go off it for good, he told himself. The second time around, he said, the issue seemed to resolve. He was relieved by how much his hair had filled in since then. Connors himself started taking finasteride last fall. At first he thought he'd made a mistake. He was rattled. He kept worrying about potential side effects he'd read about on Reddit. He couldn't remember precisely if some depressive symptoms he started feeling had come on soon after he first took the drug. But to be safe, after a few weeks, he went off. When his low mood persisted, he kept up a running joke with his friends. He definitely had post-finasteride syndrome. Then again, maybe he was just feeling depressed because he knew he was no longer helping his hairline. Eventually, having chalked up that previous dark mood to a stressful time in his life rather than to the finasteride, he went back on the drug. He said he wouldn't be surprised if at some point he returns to perseverating and second-guessing his decision. But for now, about 3 months into his second effort, he feels fine and is hopeful that he's had some hair regrowth. Lately, he's even been thinking he should talk to his brother, who's 3 years younger. Get started now, he'd tell him, before it's too late. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the April 5th issue of the New York Times Magazine. Your reader has been Evelyn. Thank you for listening.
Coming up next in the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service is the USA Today. Following that at 2 o'clock is episode number 3 of Twice by Mitch Albom. Stay with us for these readings and more. You're listening to the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. We broadcast daily readings of printed matter to those who are blind or have a print disability throughout Buffalo, Western New York, and Southern Ontario's Niagara Peninsula. Almost 40 years and more than 300,000 hours of radio readings to those without sight. Our broadcast signal is provided at no charge by WNET. Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service broadcast studios are at 1199 Harlem Road in Cheektowaga. Please let others know about your Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. For more information, call us at 716-821-5555.
Hello. The following program is intended for listeners who are blind